Thank you for being here. A special welcome to our guests. It's great to have you. Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. Let's stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And Brett, if you would come up with your invitation.
Would you bow your heads? Heavenly Father, thank you for this beautiful day. Thank you for this club and all its members, whether you're here or on Zoom. We want to make sure that we pray for those who need our help, especially the children in our community and around the world. Father, would you please bless this food to our nourishment so that we may enjoy your feelings of friendship and love through us. We say this in your name. Amen.
To all our guests, we want to wish you a warm Kiwanis welcome. If anyone is interested in joining Brighton Kiwanis, please see either myself or, not in the right place, myself or Mac. Mac is in the back. We're a great group here, and we would love for you to join the Kiwanis family. We have a couple of announcements. I'm being told there's been something wrong. Okay, we have a couple of announcements. Our meetings are now being held both on Zoom and in person. If you're wanting to attend a meeting at the hall in person, you need to purchase a ticket through the box office for $13.50. That pays for your box lunch. The hard cutoff to purchase a ticket to attend is the previous Friday before that Tuesday meeting at 5 p.m. because we have to have a head count to give to the caterer. So please make sure that if you really want to come in person, that you get that ticket paid for ahead of time, otherwise we won't be able to let you in. Everyone enters down at the door at the stairwell, and you do get your temperature taken as you come in. And coming in the future here, we're probably going to have a waiver everyone's going to sign as well. We will be having a board meeting tomorrow. Is going to be, if you want to come in person, it will be at Pier 22. Please reach out to Dave Grantham or Mac Aldrich to RSVP by 5 p.m. today to let them know that you'll be coming in person. They have to give the restaurant a head count, and in order to make sure we're in a room that we're properly socially distanced. Hopefully we have no technical difficulties, but I'm not making any promises. So be patient with us. Alex, am I right? There's a club satellite meeting tomorrow night, and it's at Motorworks, right?
That is correct.
See, you got it right. All right. So anyone who would like to join, our club satellite's going to be meeting at Motorworks at 6 p.m. But I'll repeat it. Our Food for Families with Meals on Wheels in Manatee County. We will have, there's times to package food on Thursday the 29th and Friday the 30th. If you go to our website to those meeting events, you'll see the slots that are open. I believe there's 2 on Thursday, 1 in each time frame, and then 1 on Friday. And I think that's all of my announcements. At this time, I'm going to ask Gilbert to come up and introduce our speakers.
Hello, everyone, and this is a day for all of us to learn. Historically, the Constitution of Florida has had amendments on the ballot every year since the Constitution was revised in 1970. And historically also, and throughout the nation, the Florida Constitution has been known as a Constitution that's fairly easy to amend. There's six amendments on our ballot this year, And we have here today Charles Telfair and also Andrea Johnson. Charles is the president of the Manatee County Bar Association, and Andrea is a past president serving in 2016 of the Manatee County Bar Association. Both of them are stars in the Bar Association. Both of them will be in Lawyers and Legends of Manatee County in the second edition, and both of them have quite historical aspect of Manatee County since they've been here a long time and been involved in the community quite a bit. And they've also headed up a number of community projects at the Bar Association. So if we could ask Charles, could you take it over?
Yes, sir. Thank you for the introduction, Judge Smith, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. There are 6 proposed amendments to the Florida Constitution on the November 3rd ballot. In deciding which proposed amendments to approve, voters must consider the nature and the purpose of a state constitution. A state's constitution is the state's fundamental law. Many argue that the Florida Constitution should be limited only to matters that are essential. In making that decision, voters must also consider whether the role of the legislature is being usurped by the constitutional amendment process. Stated another way, the constitutional amendment process arguably should not be used as a substitute for legislative action. Also, one should keep in mind that once a change is made, it is extremely difficult to remove a constitutional amendment. The only option, although that may change with our amendments after November 4th, the only option currently is to amend the Constitution, which requires 60% approval by the Florida voters. Andrea?
Thank you again, Judge Smith, for that introduction, and thank you for having me. I appreciate all of the Bradenton Kiwanis members here and all the work that you do in our community, so thank you so much. Does anyone in our live audience or on Zoom want to take a guess at the number of ways that you can amend our Florida Constitution? Anybody have a guess besides Charlie? 3. All right. So it was somewhat of a gotcha question. The only way to amend our Florida Constitution is by voters approving of a proposed amendment at an election by 60%. However, the way to get a proposed amendment on the ballot, there are 5 ways to do that. I'm briefly going to go over those 5 ways how to get a proposed amendment on the ballot and discuss, because 2 of those ways are relevant for the amendments that we're talking about today. The first way is through a joint resolution of our state legislature. The Florida State Legislature can add a proposed amendment on the ballot if 3/5 of both chambers agree to the resolution. That means at least 60% of our state Senate and at least 60% of our state House of Representatives sign off on the resolution, and then it makes its way on the ballot and citizens vote whether to approve it or not. 2 of the 6 amendments that we will be talking about today were by way of joint resolution. The second way to put a proposed amendment on the ballot is the citizen initiative. You may be familiar with this. This is the process where citizens petition for signatures to have others sign their petition if they agree with the proposed amendment. And then if they meet a certain amount of signature requirements, then it is put on the ballot. In order to signatures, you have to have the amount that equals 8% of the total votes cast in the last presidential election. Based on my unofficial research with the Florida Department of State Division of Elections website, there were more than 9.5 million votes cast in the 2016 presidential election, which means for the Citizens Initiative, which there are the remaining 4 of the 6 amendments on your ballot were by way of citizen initiatives. They had over the 767,000, just over that amount that was necessary in order for them to make it on the ballot. So those 2 are the ones that we're talking about today, but there are still 3 other ways to get a proposed amendment on the ballot for the citizens to vote for it. The third is the Constitution Revision Commission. And if that phrase sounds familiar to you, it's because we recently had that commission convened in the 2017-2018 election cycle. This is a commission that meets every 20 years, and upon their approval, they too can place proposed amendments on the ballot, and there's no signature or citizen requirement for that. The commission is made up of 37 members, and it's divided, the members are appointed by the governor, the Senate, the Speaker of the House, our Chief Justice of the Florida Supreme Court, as well as the Attorney General. And those numbers, each has a different amount of numbers. And just by way of background, our last commission in 2018, they put 8 proposed amendments on the ballot. The fourth way, lesser known way to add a proposed amendment to the ballot is a Constitution Convention. Our elected delegates can meet and propose amendments to be voted on by the citizens. But they can't simply meet because they want to meet. They too have a signature requirement. They have to get at least 15% of the amount of votes cast in the prior presidential election for citizens agreeing that, yes, we need to hold a convention. It has not happened in recent history. By way of background, I think Judge Smith touched on it a bit. We are on our 6th version of the Florida Constitution. The last one was at a 1968 Constitution Convention, and the ones prior to that also were at a convention. But this one is the lesser used of the ways to get on the ballot. And finally, the 5th way for a proposed amendment to get on the ballot is the Florida Taxation and Budget Reform Commission. This was actually not previously in the Constitution. The Constitution was amended to add this one recently. They met in 2007, and they too are a commission that meets every 20 years. And so the next one would be 2027, and they can, upon their approval, put proposed amendments on the ballot relating to taxation and the state budgetary process. So if you're ever on a quiz game show and you're about to win $1 million and they ask you, how many ways can you amend the Florida Constitution? Voters amend it by 60% of the vote, but there are 5 ways to get a proposed amendment on the ballot.
Okay, Judge Smith, I have a question for you. Wasn't Gilbert Smith Jr. or Gilbert Smith Sr. Or Chesterfield Smith involved in the constitutional amendment process previously?
Yes.
Okay. And more recently, the Constitutional Revision Commission was chaired by Manatee County's very own Carlos Baruf. So we've got a lot of Manatee County roots in our Revision Commission. The first amendment that we're going to talk about today is the citizenship requirement to vote in Florida elections. This is a citizen initiative, and you may recall that Andrea just said that required about 750,000 votes to get to the point where it got on the ballot, so significant. This amendment would change the wording of Article 6, Section 2 of the Florida Constitution. Currently, it reads that every citizen of the United States who is at least 18, a permanent resident of Florida, and registered to vote as provided by law, is qualified to vote in a Florida election. This would be changed to read that only a citizen of the United States who meets all of the other criteria, i.e. they're at least 18, a permanent resident, and registered to vote, may vote in the state of Florida. In Florida and most other states, constitutional language regarding voters focuses on who can vote, every citizen, but does not expressly state who cannot vote. Currently, no city or town in Florida allows non-citizens to vote in any election. Further, Florida state law does not permit non-citizens to vote in a statewide election. While non-citizens are not permitted to vote anywhere in Florida currently, some cities and other places in the country allow non-citizens to vote in local elections. This amendment would expressly prohibit the state of Florida and Florida's cities and towns from allowing non-citizens to vote. The proponents of the amendment argue that this amendment would afford greater protection of citizen voting rights. Opponents argue, among other things, that non-citizen residents pay taxes in Florida, and denying them the opportunity to vote equates to taxation without representation. According to the Financial Impact Estimating Conference, which is required by Florida law to prepare a financial impact statement for any proposed amendment, Amendment 1 will have no effect on the state of Florida's economy. And for what it is worth, we took a poll of the Manatee County Bar Association membership, and 60% of the membership was for this amendment and 40% was against the amendment. There were some neutrals. Andrea?
Amendment 2 was also a citizens initiative. It's titled Raising Florida's Minimum Wage. What this amendment would do is it would raise the minimum wage to $10 beginning in September 2021, and for each year thereafter, it would increase the minimum wage $1 per year until it hits a total of $15 in the year 2026. Our current minimum wage is $8.56, and under the Constitution, each year that is adjusted annually according to the Consumer Price Index. Supporters of Amendment 2 for raising the minimum wage say that increasing the minimum wage will stimulate the economy, will create business activity, and job growth. Opponents of Amendment 2 say that there will be higher labor costs associated with the increased minimum wage, and there's concern that that may force layoff, reduce employee hours, and increase prices to consumers. And opponents believe that an unintended consequence of passing this amendment is that it would hurt the very category of people that it seeks to protect. And another factor to consider when voting on this amendment, the deadline to have a proposed amendment on the ballot for this November election was actually earlier in the year. It was January or February of this year, which, if we can all remember a time back then, it was before COVID-19 was in the United States. The economy was in a different shape than it is now, and so we are now voting on an amendment in a different economic climate than we were earlier this year. And did you talk about the fiscal impact?
I did.
Okay. Yeah, so the fiscal impact, it's actually in our Constitution that citizens are entitled to know the estimated fiscal impact about amendments. And so every amendment that's ever proposed has to have the analysis by the Financial Impact Estimating Conference. So this is not any organization trying to sway you one way or the other. It's actually in our Constitution that make an informed decision are entitled to know what financial impact it may have on state and local governments. So the Financial Impact Estimating Conference for Amendment 2, they have stated that, of course, there will be increased costs to state and local governments in order to pay the higher minimum wage, and they estimate that cost for 2022 to be $16 million and an accrued cost up to 2027 of $540 million. So if you vote yes on Amendment 2, that means you want to increase the minimum wage to $10 next year and increase it $1 every year thereafter up to $15. And a no vote on Amendment 2 means that you want the minimum wage to remain at $8.56, and it will continue to adjust annually as it already does. Oh, and Manatee County Bar Association, Charlie is better at percentages than me, but I would say it looks to be another 60% were against Amendment 2 and 40% were in favor.
Okay. All right, so for those of you whose eyes aren't glazed over yet, we're going to move to Amendment 3. This is titled All Voters in Primary for State Legislature, Governor, and Cabinet. Again, this is a citizen initiative. Which means, as Andrea pointed out, that over 750,000 people signed a petition. Amendment 3 allows all registered voters to vote in primaries for state legislature, governor, and cabinet, regardless of political party affiliation. A yes vote means that all candidates would appear on the same primary, the top two vote getters, in that contest, regardless of party affiliation, would proceed to the general election. A no vote means that Florida remains a closed primary state. You can only vote for your primary affiliation in your party affiliation in the primaries, sorry. I think this is a tough one. Florida is one of 9 states with a closed primary. The 41 other states have primaries that are either open, top two, or something in between. Proponents argue that there are 3.7 million Florida voters registered as independents. I'm one of them. And they are currently excluded from the closed primary system in Florida. Amendment 3 would allow them to vote in the primaries and should increase voter turnout and competition and arguably be more representative of the electorate. In other words, why more representative? Because 3.7 million potential voters that do not have an opportunity to currently vote in our closed system would have a chance to vote in the primaries if this amendment passes. Cons. Multiple candidates from the same party could actually split the vote, and this has happened around the country. For example, the constituents of California's 31st House District are overwhelmingly Democrats. However, in its 2012 top 2 primary in California, the large number of Democratic candidates split the vote, and it resulted in 2 Republican candidates advancing to the 31st House general election. Clearly, in that situation, the will of the voters was thwarted. The Financial Impact Estimating Conference believes the fiscal impact will be minimal. It's a difficult choice. There's a risk of splitting the vote among same-party candidates if it passes, and precluding a large number of registered independents from voting in Florida if it doesn't, at least in the primaries. On this amendment, the members of the Manatee County Bar Association who responded to the survey either voted or intend to vote, 52% against, 48% for. That number sort of surprised me. For your information, both the Republican and Democratic parties of Manatee County opposed this amendment. Further, interestingly, the amendment has been challenged by Republican House Speaker-designate Chris Sprouse and Democratic Senator Janet Cruz, and we all know how hard it is to cross the aisles these days. And they argue, among other things, that the amendment could dilute black majority districts by counting GOP and non-affiliated voters. The Florida Supreme Court has given the Florida Secretary of State until today to respond to the petition to block enforcement of Amendment 3. The petition seeks to only block enforcement of the amendment because there's been some early votes cast already, and so they can't remove it or strip it from the ballot. So what they're asking is that they just don't enforce the amendment if it passes. So we'll find out more later today, I'm sure.
Amendment 4 is also a citizens' initiative. It's entitled Voter Approval of Constitutional Amendments. And the conversation we had earlier about the ways to amend the Constitution and get a proposed amendment on the ballot are relevant to this Amendment 4. Right now, we know that we can amend the Florida Constitution if at least 60% of the voters approve of the amendment that's on the ballot. This amendment would require all proposed amendments to the Constitution to be approved by voters, still at 60%, but at 2 elections. So passing at 1 election would not be enough. It would require voter approval at 2 elections. Supporters of Amendment 4 say that the Constitution should be maintained as a foundational document for the framework and structure of how we, the people, govern ourselves, and that the role of the legislature should stay with the legislature, and the Constitution, it should be more carefully amended, more thoughtful consideration, and have a broad support of the electorate. Opponents to Amendment 4 say that this will make it more difficult to amend the Constitution, and they believe voters are fairly educated to read and understand amendments, and that they do not need a second election to determine whether or not they want to approve the constitutional amendment. The fiscal impact was difficult to predict because it would matter as to the number of initiatives on the ballot, but they estimate no more than $1 million per year for the additional election costs. So a yes vote on Amendment 4 means that you want to change the current structure and require at least 60 at a second general election. A no vote on Amendment 4 means that you want to leave the current system in place that requires an approval of 60% at 1 election. The Manatee County Bar Association results were similar to Amendment 2. About 60% said no to Amendment 4, and roughly 40% said yes.
All right, thank you, Andrea. All right, Amendment 5. This is titled Limitations on Property. Absolute 3 years, the period of time during which accrued homestead rights may be transferred from a prior homestead to a new homestead within Florida. The Save Our Homes Amendment was originally approved by voters in 1992. It limited increases to the homestead property to a maximum of 3%. This helped to prevent homeowners from being priced out of their houses because prices always go up real fast in Florida, as we all know. In 2008, Florida voters approved another amendment that allows homeowners that were relocating within the state of Florida to transfer their accumulated Save Our Homes benefit to a new home if they had a homestead exemption on their prior home in either of the preceding 2 years. This allows the property owner to retain the benefits of a reduced assessed value when changing permanent residence within the state of Florida. Supporters of the amendment argue that individuals selling homes covered by a homestead exemption do not actually have 2 years, as was intended in 2008, in which to transfer. Currently, to be able to transfer benefits, a homeowner must have received a homestead exemption for the new home within 2 years of January 1st of the year in which the old homestead was abandoned, not 2 years after sale. That means, for example, a homeowner who sells their home in December of 2020 would only have until January 1st, 2022 to transfer their Save Our Homes benefit. That's a period of 12 months and a few days, not the 2 years intended by the 2008 amendment. This change would not just correct that issue, but in fact extend the time for the homestead transfer from possibly 2 years to an absolute 3 years. The change would trim local government revenues by $1.8 million and by about $10 million in 5 years. However, some note that's a real small sacrifice in light of the fact that we have a $36 billion property tax system in the state of Florida currently. Now, I'm going to give you an example of how this works, and I want everybody to stay awake during it, okay? Here's an example. If a $100,000 home is purchased in Florida and it is the owner's homestead, the property appraiser cannot increase the taxable value of the home more than 3% each year. So 10 years later, when the value has increased to $300,000, our dream, your taxable value is only $130,000. In other words, you have $170,000 of value which is not assessed against you as a result of the Save Our Homes amendments. Now, let's assume that the $300,000 home is sold and a new $400,000 home is purchased somewhere in Florida. This amendment ensures that when that $300,000 home is sold and you move to your next Florida residence, you keep the benefit saved so long as the home is registered within that 3-year period. Okay? That means the taxable value on your new home is $230,000, even though it's worth $400,000. And this amendment ensures the portability of that home for an absolute 3 years. That was Andrea's example. I'm not smart enough to come up with that.
That was my hypothetical. And understanding tax assessment and exemptions can be difficult, so if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to help with those.
Ask her. I've got one more thing to say. On this amendment, the members of the Manatee County Bar Association who responded to our poll indicated that they have voted or intend to vote as follows: 60% for, 40% against. Pretty consistent.
Final amendment, Amendment 6. This too was a joint resolution. It was also a unanimous resolution of our state legislature. It's entitled of certain deceased veterans who had permanent combat-related disabilities. And the amendment essentially is what the title of it states. In addition to your ordinary homestead exemption, veterans who have permanent disabilities as a result of a combat-related injury also get an additional percentage homestead discount because of that disability. However, when that veteran passes away, that extra percentage discount also goes away, and seeks to do is pass that along to the surviving spouse. The fiscal impact is estimated to be approximately a loss of tax revenue of about $1.6 million each year. And so if you vote yes on Amendment 6, it means that you want to extend the veteran benefit to the surviving spouse. And if you vote no on Amendment 6, that means that you want to keep the current system in place and that discount goes away when the veteran passes away. The Manatee County Bar Association, 70% in favor of it and 30% opposed to it.
All right, thank you, Andrea, and we are prepared to open the floor to any questions, and there may be a quiz at the end. Questions?
Yes, sir.
On Amendment 1, I don't know that I heard if you vote yes or you vote no differentiation.
Can you repeat the question to the people on Zoom, please?
Right. There was an issue with whether or not we addressed what happens if you vote yes, what happens if you vote no on Amendment 1. What would happen if you vote yes on Amendment 1 and it passes is that only citizens of the United States would be permitted to, of Florida, would be permitted to vote in the election. Without that change, currently, no Florida town, no Florida city, and the state of Florida doesn't allow non-citizens to vote, but they could. And this eliminates that potential loophole. So if you vote for it, only citizens can vote. Florida state government or local towns and cities could decide that they're going to allow it to happen.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Just to follow up sort of on that, if you said if you're a citizen of the United States.
Citizen of the state of Florida is what I should have
But you have
said.
to be a citizen of the state of Florida to vote in that. So if you live in, let's say, Georgia, just picking a state out of the other 49, and you're a resident of Georgia, does residency automatically imply citizenship in the state?
It's,
I don't ever recall applying to become a citizen of Florida when I left Nebraska 45 years ago.
did you apply for homestead?
Yes,
You receive all your mail here?
yes,
Your driver's license is here?
yes.
You're a resident of the state of Florida.
Okay, you don't have to apply, you don't have to apply separately to become a resident.
No, actually, citizenship, I've been through this a few times in cases that I've handled, and citizenship is dictated really by your intent. And intent is expressed by the fact that you have your driver's license here, you have your mail delivered here, all of those sorts of things. So when I was in the military, my intent was always to have my permanent residence here with my mom and dad because that made the most sense. And so I was always a Florida resident, even though somewhere else in the service.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
About Amendment 2, so does that apply, or does that work also for independent contractors? So if, for instance, you wanted to pay someone just to be like your personal assistant to walk around, does it still work for, do you still have to pay them the minimum wage based on that?
That is a question was, does Amendment 2 affect independent contractors and whether or not you have to pay them minimum wage? And I was going to comment, that's an excellent employment law question. It's a legal question as to who is required to be paid minimum wage. That's not my area of practice, so I would refer you to someone who is familiar with that practice of law. I don't know if Charlie, if you know, because there's a legal distinction between employees and independent contractors under the law.
And I agree with Andrea, it is a legal distinction, but Florida Tax Watch, their position is this would require all employees to receive that minimum wage. So I can tell you what Florida Tax Watch says about that.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
But the question actually brings up a point. Oftentimes, after these amendments are passed and make their way into the Constitution, there's all sorts of unthought of issues like what you've just raised that are not answered in the text of the document, and that creates litigation.
And that's an example of why this, we're talking about Amendment 5. They passed that amendment, and it had some loopholes that people pointed out. And so now we're trying to close those loopholes. So even though 750,000 people approve of the amendment going on the ballot, and even though it's vetted by lots of different folks, there's always ambiguities that we lawyers can find.
I think you had a question as well.
I think he sort of just answered it, but I was wondering why in the last two they were unanimously voted on by the legislative sounds like they were already amendments.
That's actually a good question because it points out, okay, sorry, online folks. The question was, why is it a constitutional amendment? And if there were the two joint resolutions by our state legislature, why not just enact it into law? And that actually highlights the point of the ability to, what some would say, easily amend our constitution. They had to do a constitutional amendment because tax issues are currently under the Constitution. Previous amendments were passed, and so the only way to fix or correct a constitutional amendment is through another constitutional amendment. Because you're right, some of these issues could be resolved by the legislature, but once it's enshrined in the Constitution, it is a constitutional right, and the amendment process is the only recourse.
And I'm not trying to be partisan, but I would point out that places like Georgia, apparently, you mentioned Georgia earlier, my law partner Alan Bobo is from Georgia. He said their state constitution is hundreds of pages long because of all the amendments that have been added to it. And that's why I sort of talked in the beginning about the framework and what exactly is a constitution, and do we really want to usurp the legislative process? But the problem that we have created is some of these amendments are now enshrined in the Constitution, as Andrea points out, and the only way to fix that problem is to pass another amendment.
And I have not printed out our Florida Constitution. I always read it online, so I don't know how many pages ours is, but our current version that was ratified in 1968 has been amended 140 times.
And one of those amendments includes pigs? Right. Pregnant pigs, yes. I'm not sure that belongs in the state constitution, but that's just me.
Interesting fact, and nothing to take away from that amendment, but when that amendment was enacted, it was only a 50% voter approval, and it was after that that we agreed to require the current 60% voter approval of amendments.
And we think this is why the legislature came in and said, you know what, we want to make it, you have to do this twice. It's got to go through twice for it to pass, because they're concerned about the same issues that are occurring in Georgia. And with that being said, I still think there's some pretty good amendments on this. So,
When did it switch to 60%?
I want to say, you can fact check me, around maybe 2008, that time frame. Because, and it's pointed out that certain amendments they passed above 50 but under 60.
all right, any other questions? Yes, sir.
This is sort of related to the power of the state Supreme Court, I guess. In the past, there have been proposed amendments that have been thrown out because they were considered ambiguous, and then sort of followed, if an amendment is passed, can the Supreme Court, do they have any power over that amendment if it turns out to be unconstitutional with other parts of the state constitution?
That's happening as we speak.
Oh, okay.
As we speak, the
Can you
Florida...
repeat the question for the Zoom?
Oh, I apologize. I get so excited. All right, the question is, if an amendment does get passed, can the Florida Supreme Court overturn it and say it's unconstitutional? The answer is yes. And in fact, as I pointed out with Amendment 3, this is the one that says all voters vote in primary elections for state legislature, governor, and cabinet. I think I told you that the Republican and Democratic parties of Manatee County opposed this amendment. And further, the amendment has been challenged in court by Republican House Speaker Chris Sproles and Democratic Senator Janet Cruz, and the Florida Supreme Court has given the Florida Secretary of State until today to respond to their petition to block enforcement of Amendment 3.
In our Florida Constitution still must be consistent with the United States Constitution, so the U.S. Supreme Court also has authority to declare constitutionality of, if an issue is raised before the court, of provisions in our Constitution.
Thank you.
All right.
Any other questions?
This has been very fun.
Yes, no,
Thank you.
this has been very fun. So I have a note for you that you might want to say something about. Just trying to help you.
Gilbert's great. I worked with a lawyer named Warren Goodrich. Warren Goodrich was a forward air controller during World War II. He flew planes and spotted bad guys and called in airstrikes on them, or artillery on them. Pretty tough job. Came back, he went to the University of Florida, went to law school. He was the editor of the University of Florida Law Review. Very smart man, and I started working for him in 1988 as a clerk. And he was also a member of the 1968 Constitutional Revision Commission, and I'm sorry, Mr. Goodrich, I forgot that. So, thank you, Gilbert.
Well, thank you very much. We greatly appreciate you both, Charlie and Andrea, educating us. These are not lightweight votes to take into consideration. I especially enjoyed the comment about how, voters can decide on these. I feel I'm fairly educated, and I've been studying them for 3 weeks, and I'm still kind of confused about some of them. So thank you so much for coming to educate us. We have golden rulers for you, both of you, to measure your future success by.
Thank you, thank
We
you.
appreciate it. I'll bring the
Can you
two
tell my
around.
wife that I have a golden ruler and she doesn't listen to me?
Good luck with that. That's all I'm going to say.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you too. So thanks everyone for coming. I just want to add one reminder at the end of our meeting today that we do have a board meeting tomorrow. Dave's sitting over there. If you haven't told him or email him, let Mac know that you're coming in person tomorrow so that they have a good head count for the restaurant. Pier 22, and we'll send out an email later tonight, letting you know what room, so you know where to go. All right?
No, we won't.
Yes, we will. We're not going to make everybody guess. So I want to thank everyone for coming. Thank you for following the mask rule and wearing your mask in the building. There is a mask requirement in the theater. So we appreciate it, and everyone go and have a wonderful day. God bless.
Thank you.